you talk about AR-15s in the book about how they're a military weapon of war, right? Mm-hmm. And that the industry has used this gun to enrich itself and sell a lot of these rifles, relying on things like the fact that they were employed with the military in Iraq and Afghanistan, and a lot of veterans are like them, and they had a lot of screen time during coverage of those wars. But I mean, Kimber became popular through making 1911s, which, I mean, isn't that the same basic timeline of how the 1911 became really popular? It was the sidearm.
This is what you get when you have a podcast with a gun guy, because he knows what the hell he's talking about.
So I just think, that's they see a parallel there, and I wonder why you find one more objection than the other.
And I think that's a very intelligent question, and I have thought about that a lot. And I think I just kind of go back to the point I made about how civil democracy functions. It's not that, a bolt-action rifle at one point was a military gun, right? A Mauser 96, a Mauser 98 became the Winchester
pretty much
Model
every
70.
kind of action has been employed in military use at some point or another.
Right. And I think as a society, we have always struggled with essentially where is the line in the gray area in which we have to function. We're okay with restricting third graders from getting howitzers. So that's like a no debater, right? We are debating, it seems constantly, whether this semi-auto or fully auto or whatever 3-round burst, AR-15 with 10-round magazines, 30-round magazine, however, we're debating that. That's in the gray area. We've accepted as a society, generally speaking, handguns, bolt-action rifles, things that used to be military guns but aren't now. And I think it's important that we understand that all guns aren't the same, and that, yes, 1911s were obviously a military sidearm for a long time, but they're mostly, almost all handguns are generally a defensive handgun or a defensive gun, right? They're not... although they are used offensively and can be modified, and some cartridges are more offensive in nature than defensive in nature, generally speaking, handguns are thought of as a self-defense tool. Certainly something like the 1911, which is generally, a low capacity 7, 8, 9 round sort of gun, is not, and a limited range. I don't know, what would you say effective range on a 45 is? A few dozen yards, right? It's different than something that's more modern, has a much larger effective range, has a much larger magazine capacity, it has been much better engineered to be an offensive gun instead of just a defensive gun. And so...
Well, can I take one issue with that?
Sure.
Just, I understand what you mean as far as like rifles obviously have a much much longer effective range than a handgun, but if you're talking about like the criminal use of firearms in the United States, obviously handguns are used far more often than rifles or shotguns.
Yeah, much more.
So that's the only thing where like I understand what you mean by offensive, like in a military context, certainly that distinction makes sense, but in a civilian context, handguns are generally far more involved with crime because they're small and concealable, which is what criminals generally prefer. Yep. And then, rifles have been used in some very high profile, and the AR-15 in particular, in very high profile crimes for sure, which you detail in the book. But generally speaking, handguns make up the majority of criminal use of firearms in the United States and elsewhere. So I guess that's where like that distinction falls flat with me personally a little bit. Yeah, no,
I think you're absolutely correct. And that's why I think we don't have one issue. Like when people say the gun issue or the gun violence issue, like it's not one thing. There are multiple reasons why. There's a reason why what you say about handguns is true. There's a reason why what we know about AR-15s is true. They're not the same exact reason. I focus on AR-15s a lot in the book, not so much because of the intricacies of the policy things that we were just talking about, but because of the dangerous culture that has spun up around the AR-15. This worship, this glorification, this sort of lifestyle where guns are anything and everything to you. And again, not all gun owners are like this, but the ones that are, and the degree to which we as gun owners empower it without castigating it as irresponsible, I think has become an exceptionally visible part of gun ownership, a dangerous visible part of gun ownership. And I don't think that's to any of responsible people's benefit. I don't think that's not something good.
Sure.
And that's why, you know, you could say that I elevate or I focus a lot on AR-15s in the book. I do it because the industry and the culture focuses on it a lot. Like I guess I would, you know, in simplistic ways, I would say, well, I didn't pick that as the cultural symbol. The industry and these people picked it as a cultural symbol, because you don't see come and take it flags with a 1911 on it. You see come and take it flags with an AR-15 on it.
That would be a cool flag, though.
Maybe Steve's going to have something new to sell on his website. But you get my point.
Yeah, I understand what you mean. Although I would certainly draw a distinction that you don't between the people like those who carried guns into the Michigan Capitol or who, you know, confronted your son during the Black Lives Matter protests, and people like Matt Best from Black Rifle Coffee and Demolition Ranch and some of these other groups, Military Arms Channel that you name in this book specifically. I mean, you talk about how Black Rifle Coffee, for instance, was used in the Rittenhouse case and during the Capitol riots, and that's true, right? And I understand what you mean as far as like some of the people that clung to this image that they built happened to be, you know, fringe extremist types. But, you know, at the same time, Black Rifle Coffee and Matt Best went out and did to a lot of criticism from those types of people, repudiated that association, even in the New York Times. Like they did a whole
and they caught tons of grief for it. And I guess
they did, but I want to just point out that there's to me, like I still see a pretty distinct difference between somebody like Matt Best, who's you know, in this culture that you're talking, this sort of tactical stuff, but he does it oftentimes tongue in cheek. I know that perhaps doesn't mitigate things for you, but you know, he makes clear distinctions, or at least tries to publicly make clear distinctions between what he's doing and what the people that you're concerned about, and that I think most people are concerned about, are doing, and how they're co-opting what he's. Yeah,
I think, and to be clear, I'm less critical of Matt Best in the book than I am. In fact, I compliment his marketing skills and the degree to which Black Rifle Coffee has become ubiquitous. On the other hand, I think that the situation that you just described with Rittenhouse and Black Rifle Coffee and the degree to which they first tried to do the right thing did, in my opinion, try to distance themselves, and then they got castigated, and then they kind of walked that back. And like it demonstrates to me the degree to which if you conduct your business without proper eyes on responsibility, sometimes you can't control where it goes. In fact, a lot of times you can't control where it goes. And I think that's a lot of times what are radicalized politics. People think they can start this little campfire and just sort of stay warm by it. And they wake up in the morning like, oh, geez, it's dry and the wind's blowing. Like this thing's getting away from us. And I think that's what Black Rifle Coffee has done in some ways. It normalized and minimized the degree to which guns are a serious, very something that requires an exceptional amount of responsibility, and it trivialized them to the point that then it sort of gets away from us and it permeates society in very dangerous ways. And sometimes we don't get to control where that goes. You have to control it with responsibility before it gets to that point. So when Black Rifle Coffee had sort of these tough times of seeing their logo in the Capitol with a guy who's trying to zip tie senators, for God's sake, and then trying to walk that back and trying to distance themselves from it, like it's too late once you've let the brush fire spread. Responsibility has to happen before that.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't see what they were doing as somehow condoning that action or encouraging it. And I don't think that having fun with firearms necessitates that you're irresponsible.